We are. Oh, we are going to stream and record now. Jump into the text, and I tried to do that so that.
And don't forget Facebook.
Yep, we're on. I tried to set it up so that it came, if I come early and then record it and then stop recording it, but it won't work like that. Once you stop recording and go back to recording, you have to do that. So Mike may be the designated record button here. But we do it. Other than Mike, Carlin suggested that we have a really big, we get a mouse that comes in here that we can use it as a wireless mouse. There he's going. Mike may be the designated playing with the with Mike. There's thousands of people watching this. And on YouTube.
Good time for prom.
Didn't even work, right? Say that that's.
Well, at least we have a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Sure, but it's beyond immature now. Look at this. And,
Oh, here we go.
Let's have a little fun. And here he comes. So, yeah, and Joanne's been coming the last few times in person too for the night. We're getting more people coming on Tuesdays during the day than Wednesdays, which makes sense because people are tired at the end of the day, and even again, people are still watching it after the fact. They're watching it on YouTube and on Facebook after the fact. But it is great to have people here live and engaged and together. You were alive.
I'm not awake.
You were not alive last week.
No, I was here last week. I was new.
So we have. It's nice to be able to have people in person. Which were you here yesterday?
I was not here yesterday.
No.
I had to help Kenny. That's why Mary was up.
So yesterday we had Reverend Lynn was here, Jim was here. The other people were here.
Schwartz
Was here. But it was nice to have.
How many did you have? You had about 10, 12?
In person?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, it was nice to have more, people come in. And when Gail is here next time in Santa Cruz,
Yep.
in person.
I would love to be in person.
Well, just to remind you,
person.
for those who were here or who were virtual or who are going to watch this later, you weren't here last week, even if you were here. The last words that we read last week are, it's an amazing way to end this show, if you will. Should our sister be treated like a whore? That was the last words that we read. That's a great way to close and go to credits, right? Honestly, one of the toughest rhetorical questions I've ever seen in the Bible. One of the most complex and difficult scenes in the Bible. And again, at the end of it, you're kind of thinking to yourself,
why am I having trouble?
what's the right answer?
The volume?
That's the answer.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
maybe it's my computer, but I can hear everybody talk clear and you appear to be muted. Am I the only one having that trouble?
I'm not muted.
No, you're muted in volume.
Oh.
Am I the only one? I can hear Joyce and everybody clearly.
You
Yeah.
sound clearer than he does, actually, to me.
Pardon me?
Harvey, you sound clearer to me than Rabbi does.
So,
Yes, we all sound clearer than the rabbi does. I don't know why.
Okay, so it's not me. It's
not
you, Rabbi.
Okay, hold it 1 second. Let me do one thing. Because Mike did tell me how to play with this. 1 second.
Put your little thing on.
Well. All right, let's see. Is that any better? Any louder?
Ooh,
Much better.
Much better.
yeah.
All right, well, I turned up the gain in there a little bit, so hopefully that'll be better.
Yes.
So we, so the last words that we read, this rhetorical question that at least Shimon and Levi, Simon and Levi say to their father after he tells his sons that, you're making problems for me here. He doesn't actually say you went on a murderous rampage and you killed innocent people. He says you're creating problems for me from the standpoint of now what's going to happen. And the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, are now going to be able, they have a pretext to attack us. They're going to not trust us. They'll be scared of us, whatever. You've now created a situation where we have a problem. So he doesn't actually say what you did was wrong. He doesn't say your revenge attack was unjustified, was disproportionate. He doesn't say that. He says you created a bad situation for us here. So it's an interesting challenge that he makes to them, which isn't one, if you think about it, Jacob's, and we talked about it last week, but again, we didn't discuss this point. Jacob's point with his children, or his sons, is essentially not one of right versus wrong. It's not an ethical argument. It's not a moral argument. What he says to the kids is, you have created a problem for me from a political standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
It's more than just appearances. It's right. It's more than just bad PR. It is bad PR, but it's more than that, because you created a situation where we can be attacked now, where politically this is not a good situation you put us in. But it's not one of what you did was wrong. What you did was unethical. What you did was immoral. He doesn't say that to them.
Mm-hmm.
So their response to him essentially was, if you think about it, don't talk to us about politics. Don't talk to us about appearances. Don't talk to us about the consequences to some extent. What is right and what is wrong? And our sister was treated wrong. She wasn't protected. She wasn't avenged by you. And so we took matters into our own hands. And we did what, to some extent, you should have done. Rather than worrying about what the other people are going to do what's right, Dad. And that's essentially what they said to him. So they actually challenged their father with a question of justice, if you will, which is, but our sister was treated like a whore and you didn't do anything about it. Or who was going to do anything about it? We did something about it. So their answer is one of, but there's right and wrong, Dad. So it's a.
I wish Dina was here and we could ask her what happened.
Well, okay. At the end, we asked that question at the beginning, right? Was it doesn't seem consensual, but did she change her mind about it? Was she okay about it at a certain point? At the end of the day, that's not really the question, right? It's not, I hate to say it, but that's not what the Bible's concerned with.
I know.
The Bible's concerned with the fact that somebody took advantage of her, somebody raped her, somebody did what they weren't supposed to do. They tried to fix the situation. It wasn't the way to fix the situation. The brothers fixed the situation. Again, maybe not the way it should have been done, but at the end of the day, it was the only way to stop this from not being avenged.
Yeah, I still think at this time period, women are considered property. You took our property,
There's no question, and you can't forget that.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's not really the question, but there is a question of it. They didn't say it's bad for our family. They didn't say this is a bad reflection on us as his brothers. She hasn't created shame for us. What they said is our sister otherwise is going to be treated like a whore, which is in all fairness. And I'm not saying what they did was right. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is it's a little bit more of a gray area than the Bible would maybe make it seem like. You'd think, oh, that's a terrible thing that they did. Because they, number one, they get the last word. That's the last word on the scene, on this situation. But they also essentially do talk about their sister. He talks about what the Canaanites are going to do to them,
Mhm.
what they're going to do to us, which is fair. I mean, that's about us. But they respond, but what about her? And I will tell you in that, at least the brothers address Dinah and address her situation. So
Mhm.
I don't want to say what they did was right, but I don't think the Bible is condemning them as much as people maybe would like the Bible to condemn them, think it should. I think it's much more complex. And I don't know that Jacob is really off the hook on this by the way that this plays out. And by the way, even if he's right, even if Jacob is correct, even if what we're supposed to be left with was Jacob was thinking about the future and about consequences and the brothers didn't, and they went off hot-headed and did this, the reality is that no matter what, Jacob is left with a really bad situation, which is he has no control over his sons. And that leads to what we're going to read today. The fact that at the end of the day, Jacob was not able to fix the situation himself. He was not able to control his sons. They did what they wanted to do. And there's a real sense that they are in control.
Well,
And-
Jacob seemed to have deferred
Yeah,
to his sons.
yeah, he did. Yes,
He knew about it, he didn't do anything about it. Until the
Yes,
sons
he-
came back and then.
100% said, and the Torah actually says it. That's not a midrash. That's not a midrash. That's what it says. It says that at the very beginning, Jacob heard, but since his sons were in the field with the cattle, Jacob kept silent until they came home. So he did wait for his sons to
Mhm.
be part of this. So he definitely doesn't seem to be in control. And again, at the end of the day, at the end of the story, his sons get the last word. And that's where we're picking up the story.
Okay.
And chapter 35, and we're going to read probably chapter 36 only because chapter 36, and I will say this today because we're on chapter 36. Genesis, unlike most of the books of the Bible, Genesis has gorgeous nuggets all over the place. It's gorgeous nuggets to be had in almost every line. I mean, you see, we read one chapter last week. Chapter 36, we will find a nugget, but it's few and far between. It's the only chapter in all of Genesis that is devoid of conversation. It's devoid of action, and it's really difficult. Mike said boring. Yes, it's boring. It's really a question of why is this
So how are we going to keep these people awake?
awake? Yes, well, we're going to read it really fast. So normally this chapter, we're going to read it very quick. But there's
All
one
right.
there's a nugget there, but it's hardly, you'd think, necessary to have the rest of it. Anyways, so chapter 35 begins with a whole different direction. God said to Jacob, "Arise and go up to Bethel and remain there and build an altar to the God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau." Now, this is a weird way for God to talk
Yeah.
God's self, right? Build an altar there, not to me, but to the God who appeared to you. Now, this was where Bethel is where he saw the angels. He saw them going up and down when he first left. And so he's not far away. He was in Shechem, and now he's being told to go to Bethel. And I'll show you on a map just so you can see it, so you can wrap your head around how far this is. This is not very far. This is an easy journey. Just share it real quick. Like I said, it's not very far, so you'll see it on the map. No, zoom in, this is the map of the tribes later on, but there's Shechem right there in the middle. There is Shechem. There's Shiloh, which is mentioned in our Bible, especially in the book of Samuel. And there is Bethel. So there's Shechem, there's Bethel, and then there's Shiloh in the middle. It's kind of like, again, we're talking about, yeah, down to 4 or 5. It literally is about 5 miles. And then,
Oh, really?
yes, 5 or 10 miles. And then Bethel to Jerusalem is another about 10 miles or so. Bethlehem today is in the suburbs of Jerusalem. I mean, right now, the distance from Jerusalem to Bethlehem is about 5 miles. It's about the distance from Newhall to Castaic. It's that close. Bethel is a little bit further, and then Shiloh is a little bit further. But this is about 30 miles, 25, 30, about 30 miles from Shechem to Bethel. But it's the heartland of Israel. It's literally, if we zoom back out, this is the center of Israel during the biblical times, and today it's the heart of the West Bank. So this area right here, all the West Bank today. So Tel Aviv is right over here. Tel Aviv is right here, and the drive from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is like almost east to west, a little south, is partly some of these drives are hard because you climb in elevation from the coast up to here, and so there's a lot of valleys that run along this ridge right about here, which then go down into the valley. And so there's a very big difference between the areas of Bethel and Shiloh and the coastal areas. The people who live there in the biblical time and even today, they have a very different agenda. And
It's not the easiest thing to get around.
no, it's easier to get around from Jerusalem, Bethel, Shiloh,
Right.
along the heights, the hill part there. But if you go from the hill down to the coast, then it's a harder route. And then when you go back down to the Jordan River, then you're going back down.
So if you're a Danite and you want to go to Benjamin, you track.
So exactly from the coast to this area is tough, but along this route from Hebron to Bethlehem to Jerusalem, you're not descending, going up and descending in elevation too much, because you're already higher up on that ridge. You're about, and we're not talking about 5,000 feet. We're talking about 15. The elevation up here is about 1,500 feet above
When
sea
you're
level.
walking or even on a donkey or whatever.
No, but we're talking about, again, from Shechem to Bethlehem, and actually all the way down to Hebron. This corridor, this route was the route where we read about so much. I read about during King David's time, during that time of David and Saul. We read about this area, and all the way through the Bible, this was the heartland of the Jewish people, from Judah, Benjamin, Ephraim, and then into the tribe of Manasseh. So in this story, he's moving from Shechem down to, it says to go up to Bethel, which by the way is interesting because we just saw from the map, it's not really going up, unless he wasn't in Shechem when this started. So I will say it's very possible that, again, and we don't normally notice it because we're not thinking about the geography of Israel. We're not thinking about the logistics of it. And quite frankly, you got to be a careful reader to catch all of the directions. But occasionally when people see this, they go, it's not by the same author, because the previous sentence just said we were in Shechem and now we're supposed to go up to Bethel. And again, it could be because it's a high
Later
road.
on, though, could have been years later when he said
It could be, we don't know. He could have left Shechem and stuff could have fallen out, but it also is very possible that this story is written by the author of the North a northern author.
But this doesn't make sense though,
Why?
build an altar to the God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau.
Why? Because it doesn't sound very logical or graceful, right?
Or monotheistic.
Wait a minute, maybe Bethel is the house of God and it's saying Aliyah, right? Aliyah, am I reading that right? Aliyah, Bethel, so he's going up to the house of God.
Bethel, it's the word for going up in this is kum alet, which is get up and go up. So there's no, or here it translates as arise and go up. Kum is arise and ale is to go up. So both words have a connotation of going up, right? So it could be elevation, right? It could be go up to but they're not at a higher, if they're at Shechem, they're at roughly the same elevation. But again, part of the reason is that this author, again, I don't talk about it a lot, but this author does write like that. And the previous author, the J author that wrote that story in chapter 34 is a much tighter author and doesn't write like that. And that's why when we read something like that, you're like, that doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound right because it's not written with the same style and flair that the previous author would write in. And the other author, quite frankly, doesn't care about altars. That guy or woman, whatever, it could be a woman, that writer talks about action, talks about people's emotions, talks about people, screaming at each other and telling their father, don't let our sister be treated like a whore. That's that author. And then all of a sudden we read this and you're like, what's this even about? Like, seems anticlimactic, but look, he does this, or he's told to go up to Bethel. And again, reminding him of when he was fleeing from his brother Esau, which in a sense is also interesting because God is reminding Jacob that at one time his brother was trying to kill him. Could have just said Bethel, right? He could have just said, you remember Bethel where you were before you went up and found your wives or on your way up to Padan Aram? No, remember when your brother was trying to kill you? So it's almost as if God's trying to remind Jacob, your brother, you remember your brother, don't forget your brother tried to kill you. So it's an interesting little jab at Esau again, maybe because that is the agenda. And as Mike just said, Jacob said to his household and all who were with him, rid yourselves of the alien gods in your midst, purify yourselves and change your clothes. Come, let us go up to Bethel, and I will build an altar there to the God who answered me when I was in distress and who has been with me wherever I have gone. So Jacob listens to the message, right? And he reminds, by the way, he doesn't say to his family what God had said, which is, my brother Esau was trying to kill me, and I stopped here at Bethel. I stopped at Bethel, and I made an offering. I made a promise to God. So he doesn't say that. He actually rephrases it. Says, when I was in distress. So he doesn't badmouth his brother Esau here. He doesn't remind them of that. He actually also says something beautiful about his relationship with God.
But it's obvious.
God's been with me all the time. What?
Obviously, the sons were worshiping idols.
Oh yeah, yeah. So
That's why that first sentence makes sense.
yeah. So now when God says, it's what I said, when you said it sounds like they're not worshiping God.
Right.
Yeah, it says right here that some of the family is worshiping alien gods. And we know that makes sense because we heard that Rachel stole her father's gods.
Yeah.
So when we talk about like why Rachel might have done it, there's the strain or that line of reasoning that goes that she wanted to humiliate her father. She wanted to take him away. There's even the theory that she wanted to help him by taking away his idols and making him, need to see God, which he does. God talks to him after that. Doesn't seem that way. Based on this line, it seems like she took him because she wanted him.
Yeah.
Because she wanted the gods. It was something that she could take with her from her dad's house. So this is somewhat troubling. Because it also shows us that Jacob, and again, not even necessarily the same author, doesn't have the graph of his household together. So that's going to require purging the house of alien deities. So they gave to Jacob all their alien gods that they had and the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob buried them underneath the terebinth that was near Shechem. So let's well that was near Shechem. So we assume that at some point they were by Shechem. There's only one problem. If you look at the map that we showed, let's just show it real quick. Again. So Shechem is here, and Bethel is here, and what happens here at Shechem, at least in this version of the story, is that they left their idols there. Now, if that's the story, then something else bad happens at Shechem, or not bad, but something troubling, which is that this was a place where Jacob's family gave up their idolatry. And it says they buried him underneath a tree, terebinth. Now, which in Hebrew is an alon. It's an oak. It's a fancy word for an oak or a small oak grove, terebinth. In this case, it seems to be like a singular oak. The problem with this is that the oak seemed to have been a place where people also worshiped. So there's a question here whether this place, the terebinth here, then became an altar or became something that people recognized as a place where something special happened. Jacob, and in this case, they bury their gods there. But if you notice, it also says the rings that were in their ears. Now that's weird because I get the idols, but what was it with their rings that were in their ears?
Is it kosher to have a earring?
It is, so that it's not prohibited for men and women and men, however you want to say it, to have earrings and to even have nose rings. We read that Rebecca does. But there does seem to be a connection between some of these rings and idolatry. And some people have said that it's not that every earring is a symbol of idolatry, but when they wanted to purge themselves of these things, that any of the earrings that they might have had that had been connected to idolatry, they had to get rid of them too.
Or maybe they were earrings of idolatry. No,
Yeah, so that some of the earrings might have had idols in them or representations or something that had to do with idolatry. And so getting rid of them allowed them to also, again, not every earring is like that, but that some of them were, and at least to be on the safe side, that they had to get rid of them. So this is a family purification, right? This is a family getting their stuff together. And it says, as they set out, a terror from God fell on the cities round about, so that they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. Then Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan. He and all the people were with him. Now, what's interesting about this story is that this story does seem to be based on this idea that there is going to be a punishment for what he did here with the story of Dinah, right. that the brothers would get attacked. So this is this is a possibility.
Well, it just seems like the author is laying on the previous chapter where, the reason why, he got mad at his sons.
Oh, that he has other reasons to be mad at his sons. Yeah. But here it's interesting because God God does something, God intervenes, we're not really sure what happens here. Right? We're not really sure how this manifests itself, but it's a miracle. Like, it's difficult to know because, let me just show you some of the commentary on it. Yeah, well, that's not helpful. Let's just see if any of these ones are. Nope. These are all just commentaries on the word terror. No. So the reality is that this is some kind of miracle. This is not like the people just were afraid of Jacob, but that God did something to make the people afraid of Jacob. Tat is the word that's used. And it's a terror from God. It's not just a terror.
You put a roundabout.
Well, this word is Savivo Tehem, which is roundabout. Means around, yeah, like Sevivone, like at the top, it spins around.
Roundabout.
So is it a roundabout? Is it a roundabout like in England? And now in America we have some roundabouts. No, it's the areas around it, and that's what the word is. Savivo Tehem, which is around, the areas around it. So they're at Bethel, which again used to be called Luz, and it says he built an altar there and named it El Bethel, which is interesting because it already has God in the title. So they called it God of Bethel, and God of Bethel, right? Which seems like a weird thing to say because it's already Bethel. It's already the house of God. But it's almost as if they wanted to stamp God's name on it, Elohim. And so it's almost as if they were saying, it's not just any God, it's God. The God who's the Bethel. And it was where God had been revealed to him when he was fleeing his brothers. They actually go back to that place as a family. So they go back to Bethel. Bethel was one of the most important cities in the north. And again, why is this story even here? To establish the fact that Bethel was a holy city. And so this little 7 verses, if you will, about Bethel actually is supremely important, because what it does is it says that, at least for some of Israel, the northern people, the northern tribes, Bethel was a historical shrine that goes back all the way to Jacob. And so lest anybody think this city isn't important, what are you talking about? Jacob actually went there with the whole family, with all the tribes, when they were still just the guys. And they made this a holy city. And it was a place where God was first revealed to them, to Jacob.
What's there now?
What's in Bethel today?
I ask you.
Palestinian territory.
Is it really?
Yeah. Now there is a Jewish settlement, village, city in Bethel called Beit El. And there is a presence in that area, but it is, it's not been very excavated. And it's a little bit of a problem. And it's interesting that on one hand, we want control of Bethel, but on the other hand, digging up this altar is not going to be something that the Orthodox Jews that live in Bethel are going to want to do. Because when Bethel was established during Jacob's time, and then later on consecrated during the time of Jeroboam, the king who rebelled against Solomon, he established an altar, Jeroboam, at Bethel that rivaled Jerusalem. And so he established one altar at Bethel, and he established one in the north at Dan. From one end of his country to the other, one end of his kingdom to the other, the northern tribes had an altar on each end of it. A northern one in Dan and a southern one in Bethel. And in each one of those altars, according to the book of Kings, Jeroboam put a golden calf. And these golden calves were places where people offered sacrifices. And they were considered to be, according to the writer of the book of Kings, abominations, and places where people did reprehensible things. Did they do reprehensible things there? It's hard to know, because we have the story written by the people who lived in Jerusalem who didn't want any rival altars. But Jeroboam had two altars, one in Dan and one in Bethel. And he had those altars functioning during his kingdom, as if to say God is on top of our kingdom, from one end of it to the other. The golden calves weren't gods. They were chariots. They were the transportation for God. And God had one on each end, and as if to say that God is floating over the kingdom. From one side of the golden calf, from one golden calf to the other golden calf, God was over that. And so Bethel was a very important site for the north until it was destroyed by the Assyrians. And for the people of Jerusalem, it was vindication, saying Bethel was never supposed to be built up. And so for Orthodox Jews who look at the totality of the Bible, Bethel is not a place where we should be praying. It's not a place where we should have an altar. We should inhabit it. We should live there. But we should definitely not be having an altar there. The fact that Jacob had an altar there is okay, but not a place where Jews later on should have had an altar. The only altar was supposed to be Jerusalem. So that's why these verses of Bethel are so important, because they establish and remind people in the north that these are our holy cities, long before Jerusalem. So the next line we read, a little different. Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died and was buried under the oak below Bethel. And it was called Alon Bakut, which is, Alon is a terebinth, an oak. And Bakut means crying or weeping. Now, why was this so important? Well, obviously, this woman, Deborah, was very important to Rebekah. Again, Rebekah is Jacob's mom. So Deborah was like much older than, well, would have been much older than Jacob. And we don't know that she just died, but she had been died. She had been buried. She had died and been buried under this oak. And in Bethel. So there was another reason why Bethel was important, because this very important lady was also buried underneath an oak there. And again, some of these oaks became places of worship. Some of these places that were oaks were places where people made sacrifices or prayed under these oaks, these holy trees. So it says, God appeared to Jacob on his arrival from Padan Aram. God blessed him, saying to him, whose name is Jacob, you shall be called Jacob no more, but Israel shall be your name. Thus he was named Israel. And God said to him, I am El Shaddai. Be fertile and increase. A nation, yea, an assembly of nations shall descend from you. Kings shall issue from your loins. The land that I assigned to Abraham and Isaac, I assign to you, to your offspring. Will I assign the land to your offspring? Yeah.
Is this the first time we've heard El Shaddai?
No, not the first time we've heard the name El Shaddai. We heard it earlier in Genesis, much earlier during the time of Abraham. We heard the name El Shaddai. But it's not a common name for God. It is also, again, not usually translated. If you look at the note here, we have the other time in Genesis chapter 17 where we saw the name El Shaddai when Abraham came to Jerusalem and sacrifice when they rescued the people from, after the rescue of the people from the Sodom and Gomorrah, when those cities got attacked, they went to Jerusalem and they offered a sacrifice to El Shaddai. But what's interesting about this version of the story is we have another version of the story of how Jacob got his name Israel. So Jacob being called Israel is, there's two versions of the story. In one, Jacob wrestles with an angel. And in another, God appears to him and tells him that his name is going to be Israel. And in this one, it doesn't say anywhere you struggle with the divine and with the human. Doesn't say that.
Different author.
So we're left with, we have got two versions of this. And again, how do people rectify it? Well,
Moses,
they say that, this is just a reminder of what happened. It's just a summary of what happened. It didn't say anything about the wrestling. But what we do have also is this blessing, which we didn't have when he first came back into the land, which is the blessing essentially that connects him to Abraham and Isaac and says to him, I am going to make sure that your descendants are going to be kings, that your family will be an assembly of nations. It will be a kahal goyim. And again, the word goyim means just nations, but a kahal goyim means an assembly of nations, a congregation of nations. Not there'll be many different nations, but almost as if to say there'll be one nation, but many, many groups within this configuration, which is essentially what happens, of course, when they become tribes and when they become people in the land later on. So again, the prophecy, which again could have been written after it already happened, is one that doesn't just say, as it was told to Abraham and Isaac, that many nations will come from you, but this kahal goyim, this idea of, again, being an assembly of nations means there'll be something unified in your descendants. It's not that your descendants are just going to become lots of peoples and lots of nations, but that your nation, Jacob, will be an assembly within a nation, an assembly of a confederation, if you will, of people, but they'll still be unified. And that, of course, is what makes Jacob special, what makes him our last patriarch, if you will, is because none of his kids left the fold. Right? Isaac has Esau, he leaves the fold. Abraham has Ishmael, has Midian, has lots of kids. They're not all his family. They're not all one family. Jacob's family all is supposed
This
to
was
be.
written.
Yeah.
Most of the tribes were gone, weren't they?
No, when this was written, the tribes were still.
Were they?
Yeah. When it was edited together.
I guess that's what I meant, yeah.
Yes. Well, by the time it was edited together, most of the northern tribes had been exiled. But what was powerful about this was this recognition that the tribes are essentially unified by all being the descendants of Jacob. What keeps them together is that idea of the connection, that we have a connection that makes us unified. Even if we don't get along, sometimes we are one people. So we're an assembly of nations, a nation. And that's why I translate this, a nation, yea, an assembly of nations. So what's difficult to kind of see is, again, what does it mean to be a kahal goyim? It means that even within that assembly, you're still one nation. So, and again, we're reminded of the connection to Abraham and Isaac, and the fact that, again, this is the land that your descendants will be connected to. And then it says, God parted from him at the spot where God had spoken to him. And Jacob set up a pillar at the site where God had spoken to him, a pillar of stone, and he offered a libation on it, and he poured oil upon it. So this is an important thing. I mean, this site of Bethel is very important. It's the place where he talked to God or made a promise to God. When he first left, it's where he came back to some extent, and has now dedicated it. And Jacob gave the site where God had spoken the name Bethel. Now, I will tell you, that seems repetitive. And that's because, again, there's two slightly different versions of this, which actually, again, is obvious when we see that one place it's called El Bethel and the other place it's just called Bethel. Not a big deal. There's two stories woven together of how this place got its name. They set out from Bethel, but when they were still some distance short of Ephrat, Rachel was in childbirth and she had hard labor. When her labor was at its hardest, the midwife said to her, "Have no fear, for it is another boy for you." So Rachel is having a very difficult childbirth. She is on the road. And again, to remind people where we're talking about. They're in Beth, they left Bethel.
Where are they going to?
They're going down this direction. Right about here. Where they're going to is an interesting question, right? But are they going back to Hebron? Are they going somewhere south? Because again, it seems like they're meant to go up north. They were going from the south to the north in those journeys. But it says that she is near Ephrat. And the good news that she's told by the midwife is that it's all worth it because you're going to have another boy. Which, by the way, it almost seems to imply that she did have daughters, but I'm not going to say that that's definitely there. But there is this understanding that she had a boy already. Was that her only kid? Maybe. Joseph might have been her only kid. But when she says, "Have no fear, for there's another child in you," she says another boy. Point is that as she breathed her last, or she was dying, she named him Ben-Oni. His father called him Benjamin. And so it doesn't appear to the midwife that she's going to die. Or
It's hard
maybe,
labor,
or
so.
maybe, but maybe she was just telling her, "Have no fear, if you die, that at least you're going to have a boy." But his name, Ben-Oni, means son of my suffering. Now, it's also possible that Ben-Oni means, again, that this word Onah has something to do with strength as well. Which would not be as negative as the son of my suffering. How does King James translate it? Yeah, it just says Ben-Oni, right? Is there a note by it? Nope. It doesn't matter because Benjamin is his name. And that means the son of my right hand, or the son of the south, or the son of my strength. So the father definitely gave him a name that has a connotation of being one of strength, one of goodness. So it's an interesting story because it's not a very long story. It's 3 verses, but when we read about the other births of the boys, the mom names the kids. Mom names all the kids. She did name him. Yeah, she named him, but that's not what he's named.
Right.
Jacob gets the last word in this on this one. And it's almost as if he said, "I don't want my son to walk around with a negative name. I don't want him to be remembered as the son that killed his mom." Now, we know he loves her very much. Jacob loves Rachel very much. Actually talks about this on his dying, literally in his last words. He reminds his family how crushed he was when she died. This is still the moment that he looks back on as the biggest tragedy in his life. He doesn't talk about when he thought his son was dead, which was pretty bad. I mean, it ended up having a happy ending, but he talks about this. He talks about Rachel dying. By the way, if Leah had already died by that point, do Leah's kids want to hear that? I don't know. Might have been a little hard for them to hear. But the father was still talking about Rachel and not their mom. I don't know. Or also Bill had Zilpah, but I guess you wouldn't have been surprised with that since they were not his first choices. It wasn't even necessarily like, again, a wife, but whatever. The point is that he does love Rachel so much that this loss that he suffers here, it stays with him for a long time. It stays with him till the end. So when we talk about grief and loss, you know, as Joyce does in the group, this is part of Jacob's life. It never stops being a part of Jacob's life. But I think it is interesting to mention that he doesn't let his son Benjamin be defined by that. He doesn't let his name, he doesn't allow that name to stick. He intervenes. Now, here's the weird thing. Well, it's all weird. This is really a weird thing. Rachel died and she was buried on the road to Ephrat, which is now Bethlehem. So this is just south of Jerusalem. And it says on the road to Ephrat, which means that she was not buried near a city. She was not buried in a place where people would normally go and visit, other than it's off the freeway. Which, by the way, all of our cemeteries are off the freeway. Did you ever notice that?
Oh,
Well, that's true. The one that no one can go to. Yeah, that's right. Shalom is the only one that's way off the freeway. But our cemeteries, for the most part, and that's not just in LA, that's in other cities too, are fairly freeway accessible.
you should see the ones in Illinois, though,
Really?
cornfields.
So
There's families buried in cornfields.
in the Jewish cemeteries, for the most part, they wanted to have access to the roads.
Right.
And
That cemetery is called Bethel.
It is,
Bethel,
isn't
oh,
it?
wow.
Where your family is.
Yeah, there are cemeteries called Bethel.
Well, this is a Christian cemetery.
I know, the Jewish cemeteries are not usually called Bethel, but they could be. I mean, it's just that they're not. They're usually named after mounts, you know, different mounts, but mountains. I mean, it's just other cities are also mount. Even when they're not mountains, they're called Mount something.
Mount Hillside.
Mount Zion. Well, that's hillside in the name, but they didn't even bother putting the Hebrew word in hillside.
No.
Anyways, she's buried essentially off the side of the
So
road.
we don't know where.
We do,
Oh, we do.
yeah. What's interesting about this tomb is that it occupies a special place in Jewish geography. And so the tomb of Rachel, which I'm going to show you right now, is actually very much a place of where, well, we believe where she's buried. I'll show you a picture of it. You can go visit it. People have been, they're not allowed to excavate it, but it is a place right outside of Jerusalem where people go. And because it was it was the only person there, people have been going there for a long time. I'll show you, I'm going to show you a picture of it from the 1800s. This is what it looked like in the 1800s.
Take that one.
So this is what it looked like when pilgrims first came there from Europe, you know, in the 1800s, and were making picture books. That's what the tomb of Rachel looked like then. It looks like this today. It's been rebuilt, and so this is all Jerusalem stone around it. And you can see the dome, the dome back there. So the tomb of Rachel is a place of pilgrimage. Why do people go there? Kever Rachel. It's called Kever Rachel, burial place of the matriarch. Held in esteem by Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Also called the Bilal bin Rabab Mosque. 5 minutes to Bethlehem. And what does it say? It says right here. Why do people go there? People go there for really important things. According to Midrash, the first person to pray there was Joseph. While he was being carried away to Egypt, his brothers had sold him to slavery. He broke away from his captors and ran to his mother's grave. He threw himself on the ground and wept, "Mother, mother, wake up, arise and see my suffering." He heard his mother respond, "Do not fear, go with him and God will be with you." Wow. So that was important because Joseph got to walk past her tomb while he was going away. She's not buried with the rest of the patriarchs and matriarchs in the cave of Machpelah. Jacob is buried next to Leah. He's not buried next to Rachel. Yeah. I will tell you one other thing here. One second. I'm going to go back actually. A Jewish tradition teaches that Rachel weeps for her children. If the Jews were taken to exile, she wept as they passed by her grave in on their way to Babylonia. And it actually says that in the prophet Jeremiah. And we actually read that. Rosh Hashanah, second day. The Haftarah from Jeremiah talks about Rachel weeping for her children. Why does she weep for them? Well, they're her children. And when they went out into exile from Jerusalem, they walked past her grave and they were able to walk past it. And she cried for them and told them not to give up. What's really important about that, till this day, there's an ancient tradition regarding segula, or a charm, which is the most famous ritual, woman's ritual at the tomb. A red string is tied around the tomb 7 times, then worn as a charm for fertility. The use of the string is comparatively recent. There's a report of its use to ward off diseases in the 1880s. So, see the last thing here. The Torah Ark in Rachel's tomb is covered with a curtain. Parochet, made from the wedding gown, Nava apple palm. The young Israeli woman was killed by a Palestinian terrorist. Cafe Hillel in Jerusalem. 2000. Terrible attack on cafe, coffee shop in Jerusalem. So that was a connection to Rachel and her children, to her daughters. So it's connected to fertility. It's connected to, especially modern days, if you go to the tomb of Rachel today, you can buy a red string and you're supposed to tie it around your arm, and it's supposed to be good luck, a charm for fertility. I'm not supposed to do things like that, but that doesn't mean people don't do it. And there are people who do it. So Rachel is very important. Again, according to the Zohar, the mystical work of Kabbalah, when the Messiah appears, he will lead the dispersed Jews back to the land of Israel along the road which passes Rachel's grave. So the road that she's buried on is a major part of transportation to Jerusalem. And so when people would go past her tomb, they would be reminded of her. She would remind us of her heart, her love for us. And so Rachel is attached to us as a matriarch who has the ability to pray on our behalf, intercede on our behalf, is our compassionate mother. And so she is, well, she's the closest thing actually to the descriptions of Mary that we have in Christian literature, especially Catholic literature, Marian literature, if you will, that elevates Mary to a very high level in Catholicism. It's not all forms of Catholicism. It's not in every Catholic person's wheelhouse, but there are Marianists. There are people who value Mary as an example and as a part of God, if you will, one that is the compassionate and empathetic, motherly part of God, if you will. And so Rachel kind of fulfills that for us, similar role that Rachel plays for us in tradition. And here she is dying, giving birth to her last child, Jacob's last child, and tribes are complete with this birth. But to some extent, the place that she is buried becomes of singular singular importance. She's the only person buried there. So she definitely has an important role to play, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago. There's also this feeling to some extent that Jacob cursed her. That Jacob literally, when she took the idols and sat on the idols and said to her father that she's in childbirth, not childbirth, but in menstruation, that Jacob literally cursed her so that she would die in childbirth, unintentionally, but by saying whoever has these idols should die.
How far are they from the cave?
Well, we could take a look. It's not, again, it's on the way. It's closer, they've been walking towards that direction, right? So here you have Jerusalem, or they were in Bethel. They were in Jerusalem. I mean, they would have walked past Jerusalem, but Bethel, Bethlehem, and Hebron, which is where they're buried. So you can see it's almost halfway.
They could have done that.
Maybe. But she's literally buried halfway. It's almost from Bethel to Hebron. Bethlehem is almost. And so here we have another place that became, to some extent, a holy site. So we have Shechem, we have Shiloh, we have Bethel, we have Bethlehem now, we have Hebron. Haven't had Jerusalem yet. We will, and that'll be the most important. But as you can see, if you look at the direction from Shechem to Hebron along these Judean foothills, Jerusalem's almost right in the middle. Not quite in the middle, but between Bethel and Jerusalem, you have kind of an understanding of kind of being in the center of the heartland of the Jewish people. So again, Bethel was the northern part of Benjamin. Yeah.
To north,
Who?
Jerusalem.
So Jerusalem is right on the border.
Yes, right.
Jerusalem would be literally on the Mason-Dixon line, because it's the southern part of Benjamin, right on the border with
Right.
Jerusalem.
Judah's south, right?
And everything up here, everything north of this area right here is the north, right? Is the northern kingdom. Those are the 10 tribes to the north. Whoa, all those. Shimon is surrounded by Judah and just becomes completely subsumed by Judah. So they're the only tribe in the south, and they essentially disappear. They get absorbed into Judah. Right? They just
When they
become
were
part of it.
fighting, was Reuben part of the south?
When the tribes, yes. So Reuben and Gad and Manasseh, all those tribes. Now the interesting thing is, by the time that Judah becomes a separate kingdom, when Judah becomes the capital of Israel, and then only the capital of Judah, and Dan and Bethel are the two capitals. By the way, here you can see Dan in the north, Bethel in the south. This was the kingdom. Much of Benjamin, just so you can see, much of Benjamin was actually taken over by Judah too, especially Jerusalem. So Jerusalem was the north end of the tribe of Judah, of the kingdom of Judah during the time of King David. But really, by this point, it was all the way up to here. There was not much left of, Dan was already gone, by the way. Dan, by this point, all this stuff was Judah, and Dan was now up here. Dan. So Dan was now up here. They
They were a
moved.
lot smaller. though.
They moved. It got moved. But they also really got pushed out by the Philistines that were living down here. This was these cities, Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, Ekron, these 5 cities were the Philistine cities. Those cities pushed out Dan. Dan, you could see Tel Aviv would be in the tribe of Dan. So yeah, most of these the northern tribes all up here, northern and also obviously east on the other side of the Jordan River. But Judah, by the way, had already pushed out. This area was all under Judah control too.
Or was it?
Yeah. So pretty much everything up north up
Judah
here.
really took over a lot of the tribe.
Yeah. So I'll just show you right here. Just annotate it. Pretty much everything up here, and then everything here was the northern kingdom. So much of Benjamin got annexed, if you will, by it. But you can see that Jerusalem and Bethel are not far apart, and those were rival capitals, if you will. You have not many miles separating those guys later on. But this is very important because Genesis lays it out. Genesis lays out why these places are important. So here's Benjamin, comes into the world as his mother dies. And that's terrible because, here we have a young kid who never knows his mom. And that's a terrible thing. Terrible thing. Okay, so over her grave, Jacob set up a pillar. It is the pillar at Rachel's grave to this day. So you can see it became a sacred site. Now, by the way, a pillar, a matzeva, is literally a pillar, but we use that same word for a headstone today. So when people talk about what's the Hebrew word for a headstone or tombstone, it's a matzeva. So probably was more of a pillar, something that's stuck up, but we use that word for headstone. So now it says Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent by Migdal there. Now I will tell you what you will see now is we just read Jacob, or we just read Israel. I don't want to dwell on it. You don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about it. It's not that important. I will tell you when it is kind of like pay attention to it a little bit because it's one author calls him Jacob from now on, and one calls him Israel from now on. So now we have a story of we now have some more stories about Jacob / Israel. But it's the same guy. Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder. While Israel stayed in the land, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel found out. Now the sons of Jacob were 12 in number. Again, that line, sons of Jacob, was not written by the part of the verse that came before. It has nothing to do with that.
Right.
So it's a very small story. It's a story of one verse, technically less than a verse because of the way the verse lays out. But there actually right here is that A right there tells us that in the Torah, there's actually a paragraph marker, and then there's half of a line. So it makes no sense. Again, this is where the chapters and verses don't even make sense. But it's okay. Don't worry about it. What happens here is that Reuben did something really bad. He just slept with his father's wife or concubine, whatever you want to call her. It's not appropriate. Not a good thing. Not a good thing that Reuben did. Now, why is this important? And this one line really important? Reuben just disqualified himself as the heir apparent. He literally just took himself out of the running for the leadership. And to some extent, why is this even here? Or why we're talking about it? Because it was really important. Because if people knew that Reuben, and therefore the Reubenites, were the oldest tribe, there's got to be a reason why the Reubenites are not the most important tribe. And the reason is that their ancestor showed himself not to be a good person, not to be deserving of the leadership and not deserving of the honor. And so what just happened in the space of 2 chapters of the Bible is Reuben, Shimon, and Levi all got condemned by their father. All 3 of them just got told to some, well, Reuben hasn't been told yet, but Reuben just clearly, we saw what he just did. By the way, Jacob does know about it. I'm not jumping the gun on that. Jacob does know about it and talks about it on his deathbed. He's still talking about Reuben not being a good person, not being a stable leader, not showing himself to be responsible and the oldest. The three sons just took themselves out of leadership, which now leaves us without Reuben, without Shimon, and without Levi, which now means the fourth oldest gets to be the one in charge. That's Judah. So Judah just came to the forefront. Now Judah is not perfect. And he does make some big mistakes coming up in the next couple of days. We'll be reading next week, we'll read about his big mistake. But he does do something very interesting, which is he will argue on behalf of his brother in Egypt. And he shows himself to be a person who's gone through growth. He is, of course, the ancestor of King David and King Solomon and the tribe of Judah. And so Judah will, by default, essentially be the one in charge. What's interesting is that's exactly what happens to some extent. David's own son, Solomon. Because what happens with Solomon's older brothers is they all disqualify themselves, as you read if you join us on Tuesday mornings. Because on Tuesday mornings, as we're not quite there yet, we're only David in the good old days when he was being chased by King Saul, but eventually David will have his own family, and his own family will be a major disappointment to him. It's true. One brother will kill the other brother over the rape of a sister. Would she be treated like a whore? Tell me the stories of Genesis are not being repeated during the time of King David. Because when their daughter, his daughter, Absalom's sister Tamar, is raped, he goes and Absalom kills Amnon, his half brother, kills him. Two brothers knocked out in one moment through violence, through rape. Numbers 2 and 3. I mean, not even 2 and 3, 1 and 2. The other brother, Adoniah, who is another brother who could have been king, who should have been king, who was older than his brother Solomon, he disqualifies himself from being king. Adoniah not only disqualifies himself from being king, he winds up getting killed because he takes his father's concubines and has sex with them. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Like Reuben. Sleeping not with his father's wife, but with a concubine. That's enough for Solomon to say, oh, I'm going to kill you too. Because you can't sleep with my father's wives and not send the message that you think you're the king. Who else can sleep with these women other than the king? So Adoniah gets killed for the exact same thing that Reuben just did that disqualifies him from being the brother. These stories are repeated throughout the book of Samuel and the book of Kings, and the story of David and his family.
Have you really
Not a
think
coincidence.
Some of these stories got changed a little bit for Genesis.
Look, I believe that the Genesis stories were written by people who want to tell you that, yeah, these stories were played out before by our ancestors. And they disqualify us from leadership. They disqualify us. And yeah, I mean, my instinct tells me that the stories from Genesis were written after the events everybody knew what had happened. That's what my gut tells me, because otherwise it's a really big coincidence that these stories only play out in David's family. That seems to me to be a little too coincidental. It seems to me to make more sense that the Genesis stories are basically retellings of what happened in David's family. And an author wanted to make sure that we knew that David wasn't alone to some extent in having these things happen. Otherwise, they're big coincidences. And it only happens to David. And this is a terrible thing. Now, it's only one line, but it's an important line. The next part of the story continues. The sons of Jacob were 12 in number. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Shimon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Those are the 6 sons of Leah. So we have a reminder. Now again, the sons are going to be laid out not by their birth order, but by who their mom was. Leah's sons. It's a little bit of birth order because again, these sons were born first to Leah, who in reality is Jacob's first wife. These are the oldest. Now the next list are not the oldest, they're the youngest. The sons of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. B'nai Rachel. There we have them together. Joseph and his brother, full brother, Benjamin. And those tribes will be Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. The northern tribes that are right on the border of Judah, the ones that came right into contact with Judah. Sons of Bilhah's made Dan and Naphtali. And the sons of Zilpah, Leah's maid, Gad and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Padan Aram. Now, again, Bilhah is listed first and then Zilpah, because Bilhah is given to Jacob before Zilpah is. Zilpah is given to Jacob almost again because of Bilhah. When Leah sees that Bilhah is giving him sons, she says, I better give him some sons through my maid. So that's the order of their marriage, not the order of when the kids were born. Because Gad and Asher, Dan and Naphtali are all born before Joseph and Benjamin. Now, don't want to point out every problem in the text.
Oh, go ahead.
And you could say, okay, so somebody just didn't catch it. Okay, you could say that. But my friends, these sons were not all born to him in Padan Aram. You just read that Benjamin was born in front in Bethlehem. The last thing we just read is these were the sons, and these are the sons of Jacob who were born in
But that
Padan
meant
Aram.
is Zipporah,
Yes.
Gad and Asher were born in.
No.
No?
All of the sons. It wouldn't have just said, these are the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Padan Aram. This little thing starts, these are the sons that were 12. Now, Jacob's sons were 12 in number. And the part ends with, and these are the sons of Jacob who were born in Padan Aram.
No,
Why?
Gad and Asher.
They weren't the only sons born in Padan Aram. Everybody up until Benjamin is born in Padan
Yeah,
Aram.
I realize that.
So yes, if you want to say it's only Gad and Asher, but what about everybody else? Doesn't
You
say.
don't care where they're born.
Okay, well, okay. The reality is that we just read that Benjamin was born there.
Right.
So somebody else just slipped in this little thing. And again, it's just not important. It's not important to, it's just not important in that, in that story. Whatever. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, the point is that they are not all born in Padan.
Right.
It could be an oversight. Look, they're mostly born in Padan Aram. I don't want to dwell on it, anyways. But it's also indicative of maybe she didn't die giving birth to him. Anyways, Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre, Kiryat Arba, now Hebron, and Abraham and Isaac where Abraham and Isaac had sojourned. Isaac was 180 years old when he breathed his last and died. He was gathered to his kin in ripe old age, and he was buried by his sons Esau and Jacob. Now, according to this story, Isaac is the oldest of all the patriarchs when he dies.
it's not, he's living in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron, which is where he's going to be buried. I guess is kind of convenient in that they didn't have to travel anywhere to bury him. It's a place where Abraham and Isaac had lived. Sojourned is another way of, would be dwelt, had camped there. Sojourn makes it seem like they were traveling. That was one of their camping, one of their places where they kept their flocks, where they lived, where they dwelled. So they lived there. And when he dies, it says that he was buried by his sons Esau and Jacob together. So this is nice that the sons come together to bury their father.
Esau wasn't living anywhere close, right?
Well, he's not living in the area, right? But he is not necessarily, he's not necessarily that far, because he was on the other side of the Jordan River in Jordan. So which means they would have had to send a message. Maybe he knew his father was dying and he came and stayed with him. It seems as though that's what happens to Jacob, with Jacob too, that Jacob had come to visit his father Isaac to say goodbye to him. What's strange about this is we never read that he came and saw his father the entire time until just now. Now, I mean, Jacob's born when their father is 60, so he's already kind of old when he's born. But Jacob's now in his 60s. Well, actually, he's older than that now. He's pretty old by this point. Yeah. But what he didn't see his dad until now?
But we don't know that.
We don't know. We don't know. You're right. We don't know. It doesn't say. It doesn't say. But did he not see his dad? I mean, we don't know. Could also be that he never called, he never wrote. Could be that Isaac was not happy with Jacob's lack of communication. We don't know. He was busy.
Having kids.
He was busy. It doesn't say that when he came back to the country, when he made up with his brother, that he ever came and saw his dad. Maybe he wanted to. Maybe he didn't feel comfortable around his dad. He tricked his dad.
Maybe his dad knew and didn't really care.
It's a lot here. But Isaac lives longer than any of them. He lives longer than his father. He lives longer than his son. Not a lot. It's a lot. They both live long lives. 175 and 157 for the father and the son, for the grandfather and for Abraham and Jacob. But it's pretty
Abraham
close.
was 175, right?
Yeah. No, Jacob was 157. Abraham was 175.
Okay.
So the brothers are together. Father is buried. We don't know when Rebecca died, or if she's dead yet. She could still be alive. Doesn't say anything about her here. But it does say the brothers come together to bury him, which is nice. But they got along, at least in this moment. They were there together. And so he definitely was in his ripe old age, because he got almost like a whole nother life, a half a life, whatever. If he did 120 years, he got 180 years. He got a bonus half a life. He's the only one of the patriarchs who never left the land. He's the only one who's only married to one woman. And he lives and dies in the land of Israel, and he is buried by his sons. We know nothing about Isaac. We haven't read about him for the last 9 chapters.
Even then, we didn't really.
And even before that, we didn't read about him that much yet. He's
still one
been
of our patriarchs.
completely empty from our text. Now we've read about him dying, and it's literally 3 lines. That's it. What do we know about him? We don't know a lot. Now, as you can see, we're going to read this last chapter, and you're gonna say, we only have a half hour. It's too long. We got it too fast. No, I'm just kidding. You'll see chapter 36, what we're gonna do right now. I'll tell you, there is a very important lesson. We just read chapter 35. Again, these verses tell a lot of stories. In these 29 verses, we read about Benjamin's birth, we read about Isaac's death, we read about a repetition or a line of the sons, how they were born. We read this little line about Reuben. Benjamin dies. Benjamin's born, Rachel dies. Actually, we also read about this nurse, Deborah, for Rebecca, who dies. So there's actually 3 deaths that are mentioned in this. But the rabbis like to point out that actually one of the things that really was important that happened here was that, and again, if you think about it, Rachel died before her father-in-law died, according to this. And if you look at the chronology, it could have been. The way the Bible lays it out, she dies before her father, which is that's not what you want to do. But it's not the way it should be. But what's interesting about the way this happens, the rabbis point out, is that we read about the birth of Benjamin, and then we read about Isaac dying in the same chapter. And the rabbis point out that as one great person left this world, a great person came into this world. And so they'd like to point out that it kind of, in a sense, emphasizes the cycle of life. That there are new lives that are coming in, even as lives are leaving this world. And so when it says he's gathered to his kin, when Isaac is gathered to his kin, which is you'll see it's this meaning of Hebrew uncertain, predecessors, or whatever they say. This is a phrase that we use that, but what's interesting about it is that there is this sense of the family connection continuing. And that he's part of a community. Hebrew is Vayasef El Amav, which the Am is the collective, is the people, the kin. It's the sense of being connected to his people, and it doesn't, he's not lost, right? We don't look at this as a loss. We instead say he was gathered to his kin, which is the exact opposite of losing something. Gathering something is bringing it to us, not letting it go. So, sons, Esau and Jacob. That's the last words. Sons.
This is the last, so.
Look up on the board. No, this is our chapter. So, yes. So Mike's question is, do we hear about Esau again? Does Esau do anything more? No,
Right.
he doesn't.
Yeah.
He doesn't do anything more, but we have this wonderful segue into the chapter that we were saying at the beginning is the least important chapter perhaps in Genesis, arguably one of the least important chapters in the whole Bible. It's a real tough one to deal with, right? And again, we said we have 20 minutes to look at this. It's 20 minutes too long, but no, we were going to read it. And I promise you, there is even in here there's at least one nugget. So this is the line of Esau. That is the Edom. These are the Edomites. And so again, it reminds us, and it says Ele Toldoth. These are the generations. These are the lines, or this to some extent is the story. Edomites, the descendants of Esau, are clearly important enough that we need to know who they are. And the editors of the Bible wanted us to know who these people are. And so we have this lineage, we have this genealogy. And here's what it says. Esau took his wives from the Canaanite women. Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zibeon the Hivite. Yeah, what they're telling you is it's a little different in chapter 20. A little different. It's not terribly different, but it reminds us that he married Canaanite women, Hittite, Hivite, Canaanite.
But he wasn't Hebrew anyway.
He was,
He didn't
but he
think of
wasn't
himself.
Jewish. He's not Israelite.
Well, right now, we don't have it.
No, but he's not Israelite. He's not, he's a B'nai Yitzhak, but he's not B'nai Yaakov. He's not B'nai Israel, the children of Israel, right? So then we do read that he also, then when he saw his parents weren't happy with him marrying Canaanite women, he went out and got himself the daughter of Ishmael. He got her Basimath, daughter of Ishmael, the sister of Nebaot. Okay, so he marries at least an Abrahamite, at least somebody who's a descendant of Abraham, and not like these Canaanite women that are upsetting his father and mom. Seems to be carried more about what his father is, but whatever. So we have him married to these women. It's slightly different than what we read earlier, but that's not really a big issue. The important thing again is that he marries 3 women. Hey, Jacob's married to 4, so don't go all crazy the fact that he's married to 3 different women, because Jacob's actually got 4 wives or 4 moms, or I want to say baby moms, but that's not right. But 4 women that he has kids with. That's what they are. 2 of them are wives. All right, so here we get the list of his descendants. Adah bore to Esau Eliphaz. Basimath bore Reuel. Oh, wow. There's a guy named Reuel later on. It's
Yeah.
Moses'
We don't know if
father-in-law.
it's the same one, though.
It's not. It can't be. But it tells us that that name Reuel was a known name, which makes sense because Reuel literally means the shepherd of God. It's a good name, Reuel. We don't use it a lot for Israelites, for Jews, but Reuel seems like a good Hebrew name. Shepherd of God. Reuel. Holy Bama bore Yeush, Yalam, and Korah. We know later we got a cousin of Moses from the Levites, it's Korah. Those were the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. So he's got these sons, you know, it's got his own family, right?
Cousin.
Yep. There are cousins' kids. Esau, or there are cousins. Yeah. There are Esau's kids, there are our cousins. Esau took his wives, his sons and daughters, and all the members of his household, his cattle and all his livestock, and all the property that he acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to another land because of his brother Jacob. So here it says that he left Canaan to get away from Jacob. And he didn't want to be in the same place. Now, it doesn't say anything that he did. That's not definitely not a bad thing that he did. He essentially said, you know what, my brothers come into Canaan. I know that my father gave him the blessing. You could say, hey, look, I got to get out. If my brother's going to control that land, I better get out of that land. And he did. He went to the land next door, which is modern day Jordan. That's the land of Edom. So he left. He actually got up and left. For their possessions were too many for them to dwell together, and the land where they sojourned could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau settled in the land, hill country of Seir, Esau being Edom, which we all actually already read in the same chapter. Okay? So
This isn't necessarily in order of what happened, after, their Isaac died. And then,
no,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
for sure not, right?
Right.
So here's Edom on the map. You can see it's below Moab. And then we have Ammon, the Ammonites. These are all in today's modern day Jordan. So Edom is below the Dead Sea. Later on, the Edomites kind of push out the Moabites. And sometimes Edom comes across into land of Israel. There's not really a good border between them. So the Edomites are kind of always kind of sweeping into this land right here and sometimes pushing up into here. So the Edomites are sometimes way too close for comfort. Sometimes we fight with them. Sometimes we don't get along. Now, these are the kids that we read about. Now we're going to read about their descendants, the grandkids, great grandkids. Here we go. This is the line of Esau, the ancestor of the Edomites in the hill country of Seir. These are the names of Esau's sons: Eliphaz, the son of Esau's wife Adah; Reuel, the son of Esau's wife Basemath. The sons of Eliphaz were Teman, Omar, Zepho, Gatam, and Kenaz. Timnah was a concubine of Esau's son Eliphaz. She bore Amalek to Eliphaz. Those were the descendants of Esau's wife Adah. Now, it says Eliphaz, who was one of Esau's sons, had a son named Amalek. Now, he's the bad guy, right? He is the ancestor. The Amalekites become our biggest foe. They're the people that we're supposed to wipe out. According to the Bible, if Amalek comes into this room right now, I have to kill him. No questions asked. It is a mitzvah to kill the Amalekites. And it's very fortuitous that we read this on this week, the week before Purim, right? Because according to tradition, one of the Amalekites is Haman.
That's right.
And we actually read this. That's right. We read this little part about the Amalekites this Shabbat. We read a special haftarah for Shabbat Zachor. We read about the Amalekites. So pretty fortuitous that we read about the Amalekites. And there's a wonderful midrash that Timnah, who we don't normally get the names of concubines of Esau, whatever, but some would argue that the whole reason that this chapter is here is to tell us who the Amalekites are and how they got into the world. And according to the book of Genesis, they are part of the Edomites. They are a substrata of the Edomites. We know they live in that area, though they come and go, and they sometimes raid and they sometimes attack us. And they attacked us when we came out of Egypt. The minute that we get out of Egypt, we cross the Sea of Reeds, they come and attack us. And it kind of teaches the rest of the world that the Jewish people are vulnerable, because up until that moment, no one would dare come against us after what God did for us in Egypt and splitting the Red Sea for us, doing these miracles. No one should attack us, but the Amalekites proved that we could be attacked. So they're terrible people. Now, what's so weird about this is the rabbis actually said there never should have been Amalek. Amalek never should have come into existence. So there's a wonderful midrash that Timnah actually came to Jacob and said, I want to be a Jew. I want to be an Israelite. And he told her to get out. Get out of here, Timnah. Don't bug us. And sure enough, because of that, she wound up becoming the ancestor of our enemies. So the rabbis were kind of trying to teach us a lesson. Don't be unwelcoming to people. Now, again, it's a midrash. There's no proof that that happened. But they said, looks kind of suspicious that she's a concubine. Why does it even tell us that she is, why does it even give us her name? We don't have a lot of names for the women. We have Esau's wives, but after that, we don't hear about the other wives. Just keep that in mind. So she is pointed out by name. These are the sons of Reuel. Oh, by the way, there's a wonderful midrash that Eliphaz, Amalek's dad, Eliphaz was actually hired by Esau. Esau contracted out his son to try to kill Jacob when he was out on the run going to Aram. That the reason that he comes to Aram with no property, when he sees Rachel and he sees her at the well, he's got nothing because he was assaulted by Eliphaz and some other guys, and they took away all his stuff, which is why he comes to Rachel empty-handed, because he would have had stuff. Like the rabbis asked, well, wouldn't you have come to Rachel with stuff? Eliphaz came and attacked him, took away his stuff, or took his stuff while he was bathing, stole his stuff. Whatever. Eliphaz even maybe was a problem. Who knows? But the point is that, or there's actually a midrash that Eliphaz didn't want to kill his dad, didn't want to follow his dad's rules, and only took Jacob's stuff and didn't kill him. Anyways, different midrashim about Eliphaz. But that's really the nugget. That's the nugget, is that Amalek We don't know anything about these other people. The sons of Reuel, Nachat, Zerach, Shama, and Mitzah. These were the descendants of Basamat. And these were the sons of Esau's wife, Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zibeon. She bore to Esau Yeush, Yalam, and Korach. These are the clans of the sons of Esau. These are the descendants of Esau's firstborn, Eliphaz, the clans of Teman, Omar, Zepho, and Kenaz. Sounds familiar, right? We already read this. Korach, Gatam, and Amalek. These are the clans of Eliphaz in the land of Edom. Those are the descendants of Adad. And these are the descendants of Esau's son Reuel, the clans of Nachat, Zerach, Shama, Mizah. These are the clans of Reuel in the land of Edom. These are the descendants of Esau's wife, Basimah. And these are the descendants of Esau's wife, Aholibamah, the clans of Yeush, Halam, Korach. These are the clans of Esau's wife, Aholibamah, the daughter of. Those were the sons of Esau. That is Edom, and those are their clans. These are the sons, were the sons of Seir the Horite, who were settled in the land. Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, and Anah. So these are the people that were living in that area before Edom and his people came there. Dishon, Ezer, and Dishan. Those are the clans of the Horites, the descendants of Seir in the land of Edom. So those are kind of the examples of the Canaanite type peoples that were living in Edom before they got there. Sons of Lotan were Hori, Hamam, and Lotan's sister was Timnah. So that's how we got Timnah. It was Lotan's sister. That's how she wound up in that group. Sons of Shobal were these: Alvan, Manahat, Ebal, Shepho, and Onam. Sons of Zibeon were these: Aya and Anah. That was Anah, who discovered the hot springs in the wilderness while pasturing the asses of his father Zibeon. Children of Anah were these: Dishon and Anah's daughter Aholibamah. Well, that's how Aholibamah got there, right? One of the wives. The sons of Dishon were Hamdan, Eshban, Itran, and Haran. Sons of Ezer were Bilhan, Zavan, and Akan. The sons of Dishon were Uz and Aran. Now, Uz might be an important one because it does say that Job was from the land of Uz. Now, if this is the same Uz, then one of his ancestors, one of the ancestors of Job, might have been this guy Dishon through again in that land, in that area where Job might have lived. That's maybe another nugget. These were the clans of the Horites. And the clans were Lotan, Shobal, and Zibeon, and Anah, Dishon, Ezer, and Dishan. Those are the clans of the Horites, clan by the clan, in the land of Seir. Now, these are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the Israelites. So it tells us that Edomites had kings before we did. Bela, the son of Beor, reigned in Edom, and the name of the city was Din-Habah. When Bela died, Yobab, the son of Zerach from Bozrah, succeeded him as king. Yobab is another name for Reuel. He's also Yitro, is sometimes called Yobab. When Yobab died, Husham in the land of the Temanites succeeded him as king. So he was further to the east from modern-day Yemen. And Husham died. Hadad, the son of Bedad, who defeated the Midianites in the country of Moab, succeeded him as king. The name of his city was Avit. When Hadad died, Samlah of Masrekah succeeded him as king. When Samlah died, Shaul, well, we had a king Shaul. We had a king Saul of Rehoboth on the river succeeded him as king. When Shaul died, Baal Hanan, the son of Achbor, succeeded him as king. When Baal Hanun, the son of Achbor, died, Hadar succeeded him as king. The name of his city was Pau, and his wife's name was Mechatabel, daughter of Matred, the daughter of Mezachav. Well, there's a whole bunch of daughters, right? These are women that are named that we don't normally know. Again, these are kings, and in some cases, important women that are mentioned here. We don't know why. These are the names of the clans of Esau, each with its families and locality, name by name, the clans of Timnah, Alva, Yethet, Holibama, Elah, Pinon, Kenaz, Timon, and Mibzar. And again, some of these places are named after women, like a Holibama, Magdiel, and Iram. Those are the clans of Edom, that is, of Esau, father of the Edomites, by their settlements in the land which they hold. Amen. Again, 43 verses, of which 42 of them I could do without. But now there's actually a bigger problem. What? Sure it was.
There's no need for that.
There's repetition. There's a list of people that you and I really don't care that much about. That doesn't mean, by the way, that somebody in the Bible, including the Israelites, the kingdom of Israel, didn't care. You know, they did care. We don't care because we don't.
Some books that we don't know about.
Yeah. And the Edomites, the Idumeans, the ancestors of the King Herod, who was an Edomite, we don't know the Edomites anymore. Yeah, the Edomites disappear during the time, around the time of Jesus. Idumeans become unimportant. They're not mentioned anymore. They become subsumed by the Arabs. What?
I thought King Herod was good.
No, he was an Edomite. He was an Edomite who was forcibly converted to Judaism.
Oh, is that what?
Or his grandfather was forcibly
That's
converted
right.
to Judaism. And so while he was Jewish, or at least part Jewish, by conversion, he was an Edomite by nationality, by ethnicity. Now, why do we have this? Again, maybe because it explains the Amalekites, maybe it explains who these kings were. But I will tell you this. It's problematic. It opened up a can of worms. The ancient world. We just read something. It's maybe the most blatant anachronism and one of the most blatant problems for Moses' authorship of the Bible. And people knew about it 1,000 years ago. And they didn't have a good answer. It shook, to some extent, the biblical concept, or maybe the, whatever you want to call it, the Torah from Sinai. And I'm only going to point this out to you again as we finish up, because I don't like to dwell on it, but I will share it to you when it's important. There was a line that we just read. These are the kings who reigned over the land of Edom before any king reigned over Israel. Okay, fine. We get it. They had kings before us. But the problem is, folks, that every one of those kings we just read lived after Moses.
Really? Well, and Moses didn't know that there were going to be kings in Israel.
Well, the Torah says, if you have a king, when you have a king in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy seems to know that. Whether Moses knew that is different, but Deuteronomy, or the author of Deuteronomy, knew that there was a king. This was probably written by someone in King Josiah's court.
Right.
But this is a problem, friends, when this says that there were kings who reigned in the time of in Edom, and they lived after Moses. So what's the traditional answer? Moses is being told by God, and so he can write down the future. So that's an answer. It's not a great answer. But even in the early days of biblical scholarship, 1,000 years ago, one of the great, I don't know if they included this in the, I don't know if they included this here, but I'm gonna see if it's there. One of the commentaries. Oh yeah. Ibn Ezra, who lived in Spain during the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages. He comments, these are the kings. Some say this chapter records a prophecy. Ah, well, there's your answer, right? It's a prophecy. However, Yitzhaki claims in his book that this chapter, and again, if you look at the Yitzhaki, is that this guy, Isaac ben Shlomo, who lived over 1,000 years ago, claims that this book, that in his book, that this chapter was composed during the reign of King Jehoshaphat. He explained the generations as he saw fit, Was he not rightly named Yitzchak? Everyone that heareth his interpretation will laugh at him. So it goes on with the different people. Furthermore, there were also proportionally many more kings of Judah in the time than the 8 Edomite kings who reigned until the age of Moses. The truth is that king in therefore, yeah, they didn't include the really important thing that Ibn Ezra said, which is the most important thing that Ibn Ezra says about this. Maybe I skipped over it. I'm just trying to look at it one more time. No. Ibn Ezra actually says, we don't ask questions about this. Ibn Ezra actually said, those who know. And that's the important thing about that kind of admission, if you will, was Ibn Ezra said that, look, we got a problem. We got a problem with this chapter, and it actually gave us an anachronistic thing. It shouldn't be there. So, chapter 36 is not only boring, maybe everybody's sleeping, everyone's quiet, everyone's sleeping, but it also is problematic. It's actually a chapter that I'd feel a lot more comfortable if it wasn't there, because it actually focuses attention.
And you would learn nothing less if it wasn't there,
Perhaps.
except everything well with it.
And so, look, I'll just show you this one thing right here to finish up. Ibn Ezra, this 1089 to 1164, he says, he never states his meaning explicitly, but he says, look, there's a couple passages that aren't written by Moses. This isn't the only one. This isn't the only one. So, this is the problem. So, this is again, I don't want to belabor the point. Chapter 36 is a list of Edomite kings, and it's it's not just the king; it's a list of the Edomites. But it was important. There was a point in time, obviously, that was important. So that we have to, kind of. Somebody felt it should have been in the Bible, but I promise you that the rest of Genesis, the next 20 chapters of Genesis, will not be like that. They will be filled with amazing stories, and they'll be filled as we read next week. Next week, folks, get introduced to Joseph and his brothers. The cycle.
Do we get his coat next week or 2 weeks?
And his coat next week. Chapter 37 of Genesis. Joseph is going to put on that coat. So he's also going to get the coat taken off in the same chapter. I'll tell you that we will be reading one of the most powerful stories of family dysfunction, dynamic, also forgiveness that we have in the Bible.
Yes.
Joseph and his brothers. So with that, folks, I promised you, I'm going to go through chapter 36 very fast. No other chapter of Genesis will we go through as fast as that.
Genesis, yeah.
Genesis is so rich and so full of stuff. But chapter 36 is definitely a weird one. One of the weirdest sections in the whole Bible. So with that, weirdness is done. And well, it's not done, but that chapter is done. And we hope everyone again stays healthy and happy, and try to stay positive, and let's pray for an end to war, and let's hope that
maybe even by Purim, we'll be able to celebrate with a full joy and full celebration of our hearts. So we actually don't have class next week. We're not going to be.
Oh.
But we will be at Purim. So we will be streaming it live. We'll be in this place. We have Wendy, Rickett, and Addie will be here. We'll have Homentashen. We'll have drinks, alcoholic and non-alcoholic. You don't have to have alcohol, but on Purim, you're allowed to have fun. But we will have non-alcoholic drinks like this water. But again, we hope that you'll be with us from Texas, from Washington, from Oregon.
It's gonna be on Facebook though, right?
Antelope from Imperial Valley will be on Facebook. Will not be on Zoom, but it'll be on Facebook. And we hope to see you next week for Purim, if not before. Hope again, a lot of good things, and I hope again we don't have to have any more days where we wake up and wonder if horrible things have happened. It's not a good way to live for us, but it's a horrific way for people in Ukraine to be living right now. So thanks, everybody. Good to
Thank
see
you, Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.
And good to see everybody. Always good to see you on Wednesday night.
Thank
Love you.
See you. See you in person
Love you
soon.
guys.
See, take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.